This story began one night in a psychiatric institution, in one of the wards numbered 666. Inside, our nutcase protagonist was tied up with copper wire, while his mad roommate stood nearby, smiling with a mischievous glint in his eyes, holding two exposed copper wires and asking if he should go ahead. Our protagonist, convinced that the electric current would make him stronger, urged the dude to proceed with the procedure exactly as described in the book. So the old man went ahead with the "don't try this at home" experiment, plugging the bare wires directly into the socket. Instantly, a powerful surge of electricity shot through the wires, frying our boy like a steak on a grill. Just then, outside the ward, the call bell alarm system blared across the hall as smoke poured out of the room. Everyone immediately knew that the two crazies from room 666 had started up with their crazy death antics again. Moments later, nurses and a doctor rushed in and carried our burnt protagonist out on a stretcher. His skin was charred brown, foam oozing from his mouth as they hurried him to the ambulance. Despite this, the deranged roommate insisted on tagging along, eager to see what would become of the MC. He pushed his way into the ambulance, and seeing his determination, the doctor allowed him, figuring the old man's fragile, deranged brain would also need evaluation. Back at the psychiatric hospital, as the ambulance sped away, the institution's director, Hao Ren, watched the entire scene unfold through a glass window. Inside Ward 666, two patients stayed there. Our protagonist, Lin Fan, 19 years old, and his roommate, Zhang, whose age was unknown. Both were obsessed with trying out various ways to die in hopes of cultivating their inner powers. Meanwhile, inside the ambulance, Lin Fan confided in Wang, telling him that he felt amazing, just like the book had predicted. He experienced no pain and even claimed to have glimpsed the edge of the universe. Lin Fan added that just before he crossed into the afterlife, he heard a voice telling him he had acquired the hidden world and that the hidden system had been activated. Earlier that same day, a sudden event had occurred at the center of a famous mountain deep within the jungle. From the event, a fiery level 7 beast had emerged, causing all the wild animals to flee in terror. Even mountain climbers hadn't been spared, as they fell to the ground in shock at the sight of the monstrous creature. News of the beast's emergence and its attack on climbers had quickly spread nationwide, prompting warriors to be dispatched to subdue the creature. Citizens had been advised to avoid any trips into the wilderness for their safety. Back in the present, inside the ambulance, the hidden system notified Lin Fan that the host had been detected and the warrior system was now ready to be accessed, even though the host's mental state was far from normal. Later on, the doctor reported that because Lin Fan had copper wires connected to electricity wrapped around his body, he had suffered second-degree burns. However, his blood pressure remained stable, but his pulse was racing faster than a hyena on steroids. The surgeon suggested they administer anesthesia to the patient, but our boy insisted he was fine and didn't need any operation, asking the doctor to simply cut off the burnt skin from his flesh. Hearing this, the doctor was infuriated as hell and yelled at him to keep quiet, tired of the nonsensical behavior of constantly trying to end his life. Yet the Giga Chad demanded not to be placed under the anesthesia mask, claiming he felt tougher than Captain America, and he also needed to feel the pain of the operation while staying conscious. Before he could say more, the doctor silenced him by placing the mask over his nostrils. In an instant, our tough guy slipped into a deep slumber and immediately entered a trance, reliving moments from his younger years. Back in the past, Lin Fan had always been a mental case, obsessed with ending his life. When he was 10, his mother was horrified to find him smashing his head with a hammer after reading a book on metal head skills. As if that wasn't enough, he once tried to weld his millimeter Peter with a welding gun, thinking it would seal his magic wand and cultivate his powers. But his mother stopped him just in time, saving him from meeting his maker. That incident was the final straw, as she immediately took him to the asylum. But even the asylum couldn't stop his obsession, as he soon asked to be thrown off the 5th floor of the building. A mental evaluation confirmed that Lin Fan was harmless to others, but a danger to himself. After yet another suicide attempt, jumping off the building, he was bandaged from head to toe. That was when he met the crazy old man Wang, who he begged to stab him with needles. Without hesitation, the deranged old man stared at him intensely, pulled out sharp needles, and stabbed every inch of Lin Fan's body. Afterward, Wang asked how he was feeling. Our boy replied, saying he could hear voices in his head, like Randy Orton. However, before Lin Fan could reveal what the voices were saying, his blood pressure plummeted and the doctors rushed in to take him to the emergency room. Back in the present, inside the ambulance, the system activated once again with a notification that the strongest warrior system was installing. A few seconds later, it was fully installed. Several hours later, the surgery was successful. The doctor, who had stayed up all night operating on Lin Fan, finally decided to get some much-needed sleep. When he awoke, he smiled, ready to enjoy his dinner, as he was hungrier than Luffy. But just as he took his first bite, a nurse interrupted him, informing him that the crazy patient who had just undergone surgery had hurt himself again and needed immediate resuscitation. Hearing this, the doctor went borderline insane as he was pissed to oblivion, throwing his beloved food to the ground and asking the nurse if the dude was crazy. The nurse responded, reminding the dumb doctor that the patient wasn't a normal one in case he had forgotten. Meanwhile, back at the asylum, a random idiot barged into the office of Hao Ren, the director, and asked if they would still need the grave they'd ordered from the cemetery this time. Hao Ren informed him that Lin Fan had managed to survive, so the grave order should be cancelled. The guy remarked that the cemetery had warned them that since this was the 80th time the order had been cancelled, they wouldn't be taken seriously anymore. Just then, the office phone rang, and Hao Ren answered. On the other end was the furious Dr. Li Leifu, boiling hotter than molten magma. He informed Hao Ren that his patient had knocked himself out again, right after recovering from surgery. Hearing this, Hao Ren turned to the guy and told him not to cancel the grave order just yet, because Lin Fan might still be heading to heaven at any moment. Li Leifu continued ranting, telling Hao Ren that it had taken less than 2 seconds for the nutjob to end up back in the emergency room. Still fuming from the chaos caused by Lin Fan, Li Leifu stated that after the surgery, he would personally bring his mad patient back to the asylum. He then banged his hands on the desk, warning Hao Ren that if Lin Fan caused any more trouble, he would instruct the surgeon to cripple him so that he would never cause trouble again. Meanwhile, outside the operating room, old Crazy Wong lay on a waiting chair, wondering why the spinning galaxy procedure hadn't worked on Lin Fan as expected. Suddenly, he had a brilliant idea to try it out on himself since Lin Fan had mentioned hearing voices. After a few minutes of electrocuting himself, the dumb old moron was knocked unconscious, foaming at the mouth. At the same time, the doctor tasked with performing the surgery on Lin Fan pondered just how miserable his life had become. Ever since Li Leifu hired him to work at the hospital, he hadn't had a single day of rest. It was one operation after another. Lin Fan alone had been operated on 48 times in the past year, constantly being saved from ending his miserable existence. This sad reality made the doctor cry a river of regret, and the nurses tried to comfort his depressed soul. However, just then, the system popped up, notifying Lin Fan that a hidden world had been unlocked and his body would receive a permanent enhancement, making him the strongest man alive if he accepted. Since Lin Fan's head wasn't in the right place, the system made the decision for him by default, selecting yes. At that moment, the countdown for the body enhancement began, set for 36 hours. Shortly afterward, news reports broadcast live updates from the mountain incident, where the Rank 7 fiery monster had been successfully subdued by the warriors. However, several other monsters had joined the chaos and fled into the city. Several hours later, Li Leifu stood beside the ambulance, tired and frustrated, waiting for the surgery to be over so he could take Lin Fan back to the asylum where he belonged. His wish was finally granted as nurses rushed out with Lin Fan on the gurney, informing Li Leifu that the surgery had been a huge success. Li Leifu then yelled at the medical staff to throw Lin Fan into the ambulance immediately. Taking matters into his own hands, Li Leifu hopped into the driver's seat, determined to drive the ambulance himself, even though the actual driver offered to take over. But Li Leifu was beyond frustrated. He just wanted the day to be over. As he drove, the nurse alerted him that the old crazy patient who had come with the protagonist was now also in the emergency unit, which brought the ambulance to a halt. The nurse approached the vehicle, and Li Leifu, unable to believe what he was hearing, turned to face her. The nurse informed him that the depressed doctor was currently operating on Old Man Zhang and handed Li Leifu a blood-smeared surgical mask with a message from Dr. Wang, the depressed surgeon. What Li Leifu saw made his heart stop. Stretched across the mask was a message: "I'm done. I quit." Meanwhile, back at the asylum, the director Hao Ren prayed to all the gods in the universe that the two crazy idiots who had caused him so much trouble would never return. But his prayers were useless as the ambulance pulled up to the asylum, and out came Lin Fan and Zhang on a gurney. With that, Hao Ren and 2 other asylum staff came down to meet Li Leifu. Hao Ren remarked that Li Leifu had brought the crazy dudes back so fast, just as the operation ended, as he should have waited to see if they would still enter nirvana from internal bleeding. After that, the old director begged Li Leifu for a favor to take Lin Fan and Zhang back to his hospital and keep them there as they used to be classmates. Hearing this dampened Li Leifu's spirit as a dark shadow cast on his face. He immediately threw his knees on the ground and begged Hao Ren not to end his young life with high blood pressure. He added that almost all the doctors in his hospital had quit their jobs because of the menaced continuous attempts at suicide. After saying that, he patted Hao Ren's shoulders and asked him to take care of his patient, wishing him all the luck in the world. After that, Li Leifu drove the ambulance out of the asylum before Hao Ren could tell A from B, loudly announcing that Hao Ren could keep the gurney as a gift and not bother returning it. With these, old Hao Ren sighed in frustration and, with no choice, ordered the asylum staff to take Lin Fan and Zhang to their wards and restrain them tightly so they wouldn't cause any more trouble. Later that evening in the 666 ward, Lin Fan and Zhang were tied to the bed like cattle. Zhang tried moving but was unable to move. Not with how strapped in he was, but our boy stayed calm and chilled because he could feel immense power running through his body. However, Zhang was delighted that after so many death trials, they were finally able to tap into their inner energy, which brought excitement to their faces as they stared at each other with joy, suggesting that tomorrow they would confirm their strengths by smacking their chest with hammers. Meanwhile, Hao Ren and two orderlies were just outside the 666 ward, and as he peeped into the room, he was surprised at how calm Lin Fan and Zhang were because, on a typical day, it would have been chaotic. But the two orderlies thought otherwise because they had just overheard the dudes inside talking about smashing their chest with a hammer. That very same evening, in a dimly lit alley, a young girl was scrolling and tapping through TikTok videos when a strange noise behind her caught her attention. Startled, she turned around, and what she saw shocked her to the core. Dropping her phone to the ground, she came face to face with a towering monster, its mouth filled with sharp, dagger-like teeth. Before she could even react, the creature lunged at her, chewing her up and leaving a pool of blood splattered on the pavement. The following morning, Lin Fan woke up to discover that the straps binding him to his bed had been broken, and to his shock, he was now naked but more ripped than an Olympian. He immediately rushed to Zhang's bed to inform him of this astonishing development. The old man, who had been snoring like an industrial generator, woke up and stared in amazement at Lin Fan's newly chiseled physique. Stretching out his hand, he touched Lin Fan's rock-hard six-pack, confirming that all the belly fat had mysteriously disappeared. Lin Fan explained that his transformation was the result of his cultivation, which led Zhang to suggest they continue the process by smashing their bodies with hammers. At the same time, outside their ward, the asylum's electrician was busy fixing the air conditioning system. Suddenly, he noticed a shadow on the wall and became uneasy, wondering who was standing behind him. Given that the city was buzzing with news of monsters attacking people, his fear heightened, and he almost peed his pants. Just then, a cold hand touched his shoulder, and he nearly lost his soul in fear. Summoning what little strength he had left, he turned around only to see Zhang, the mental patient from Ward 666, standing there. Relieved that it wasn't a monster, the electrician relaxed for a moment until he remembered the advice of Old Man Hao. According to Hao, among all the dangerous things in the world, patients from Ward 666 ranked at the top, even above the warriors from the special department and the monsters. Seeing Zhang standing before him once again filled the electrician with terror, and all he wanted to do was pass out. Just then, Lin Fan, who had been squatting behind Zhang, while holding a hammer from the electrician's toolbox, announced that they had found what they were looking for and it was time to leave. With that, Zhang casually bid the terrified electrician goodbye, suggesting they grab a drink sometime, but the poor man silently hoped never to see their traumatized faces again. As they left, the electrician let out a sigh of relief, though deep down, he knew his job at the asylum would one day cost him his life. After calming himself, he checked his toolbox for a screwdriver, only to realize that his hammer was missing. At that moment, he heard a loud thumping noise echoing through the hall. Like an idiotic character straight out of a horror movie, he foolishly decided to investigate the source of the sound. Following the noise, he arrived at Ward 666 and peered through the window. What he saw horrified him. Zhang was brutally hammering away at Lin Fan's body with disturbing intensity. Noticing the electrician watching, Zhang turned around with an ominous grin and asked if he was enjoying the show. The electrician, filled with panic, bolted down the hall, screaming that a psycho had committed murder. Back inside Ward 666, the system popped up for Lin Fan, informing him that the enhancement of one body part was complete. It prompted him to choose which body part he wanted the enhancement to affect. With no response from Lin Fan, the system made the decision for him and opted to enhance his hands. Meanwhile, the electrician, in a state of panic, dashed toward the asylum's orderlies, crying and claiming he had witnessed a murder in one of the wards. Joined by Director Howe, the orderlies dragged the electrician back to Ward 666 to show them the supposed crime scene. Upon arrival, the electrician stood in disbelief. There was no blood on the floor, no signs of brutality. Instead, Lin Fan and Zhang sat calmly on their beds, sipping drinks like refined gentlemen. The only thing remotely out of place was a spilled drop of their drink on the floor. Seeing nothing out of the ordinary, Director Howe turned towards the electrician, telling him he was wrong as it was apparent he would be joining them soon in the asylum because his mind had started playing tricks on him. Panicked, the electrician grabbed Hao Ren's arm, insisting he no longer wanted the job and just wanted his hammer back, which Lin Fan had taken. Hearing this, Hao shouted at Lin Fan to return the man's hammer. But Lin Fan, playing innocent, claimed he didn't know what hammer the dude was talking about. Hao Ren then pointed to the bulge in Lin Fan's dangle region and asked why it was protruding longer than normal. So our guy rummaged through his magic wand and pulled out the electrician's hammer. Hao Ren then ordered Lin Fan to drop the hammer on the ground, but Lin Fan insisted he come take it himself. Hearing this, the old man was petrified, because the lunatic could attack him with a hammer if he got close, sending him to join his ancestors. However, he summoned all the courage in the world and advanced towards Lin Fan, his heart beating at 1,000,000 beats per minute. Luckily, he retrieved the hammer successfully, and the rest of the staff applauded the old man's bravery for risking his life. He then handed the hammer to the electrician, advising him to stop being scared like a sissy. But when the electrician looked at the old man, he saw that he was sweating and trembling with fear from just pulling that stunt. Later that day, the residents of the psychiatric institution gathered at the cafeteria to eat. They watched a female newscaster broadcast on TV on how the government was taking steps to bring an end to the monsters terrorizing the city. On the other hand, two weird residents of the mental institution, one with a similar head to Humpty Dumpty, watched the news. The old papa then stated that the woman on TV was his wife, but the Humpty Dumpty said she was his daughter. With this, the delusional men cried in excitement that they were related, hugging each other. At the same time, Sang pointed at the TV, asking Levi if he knew the female broadcaster, and then Levi answered that the chick was his girlfriend. Zhang thought deeply and assumed that Lin Fan must be telling the truth. The scene then shifted to an apartment where a young pink-haired girl had just leveled up her combat skill, and she announced that now they can go destroy a couple of monsters. The pink-haired girl's name was Xiang Yang, and she was a healer from the medical academy. She was glad that her combat skill had increased, and that eliminating one second-ranked monster would be a piece of cake for them. One member of her team suggested performing this operation secretly. After eliminating the monster, they brought its corpse to the academy and showed everyone they were indeed capable. Hearing this suggestion, Xiang was confident they would complete this task as true outstanding graduates of the highest academy, and the city would never look down on them. Simultaneously, back at the psychiatric hospital, the news on the TV announced that it was February 29th. Zhang, confused, looked at his watch and wondered how that could be possible since his Rolex said otherwise. Lin Fan asked if maybe the watch was broken, but Zhang was adamant that it couldn't be since it was $1 million Rolex after all. As they debated, a mad four-eyed dude approached them, claiming to be a watch repair expert. Without wasting a second, he whipped out a hand magnifier and examined Zhang's wrist with exaggerated seriousness. After a moment, the guy assured Zhang that because he had bought the watch from him, he was entitled to an after-sales service. With that, the strange guy took out a marker, scribbled February 29th and Rolex on Zhang's paper watch, and declared the problem solved. When Zhang returned to the room, he looked at his wrist and realized the dude had written February the 29th and Rolex on the paper watch. With this, he cried that the watch was fake, and he had been scammed millions of dollars. So Lin Fan handed a bottle of soya milk to lift up his spirit. But Zhang said it was Sprite, and drank it with so much excitement. Lin Fan then mentioned that the voices in his head were growing louder and clearer than usual. Curious, Zhang asked what the voices were saying, but before Lin Fan could answer, the system suddenly popped up, interrupting everything. The system announced that the countdown was over, and Lin Fan was about to enter a hidden world. The environment around him began to shift, turning into a black and white, 1970s-style TV show set, and time in the real world froze completely. The system explained that in this hidden world, Lin Fan's mission was to help Chen Yang, the son of the hidden world's inventor, who was being bullied at school. He would have to use 100% of his newly cultivated physical strength to accomplish this task. Suddenly, in a flash of bright light, Lin Fan was teleported to a new location. When the light faded, he found himself standing in a ridiculously pink Barbie-themed room, surrounded by sparkly furniture. Confused, he looked into a mirror and was shocked to see that he was dressed in a pink tracksuit and appeared incredibly feminine. Startled, he began touching himself to confirm if he had actually turned into a girl. At that very moment, a chubby woman burst into the room, calling him Yang and telling him to hurry down for breakfast. Catching sight of his hands in his pants, she quickly slammed the door, stammering that she hadn't seen anything and that he needed to get ready for school. Lin Fan, who we would call Yang from now on in this hidden world, panicked and quickly checked to see if his baby-making machine was still intact. He sighed with relief when he found it was still there. After confirming, he changed from his girly outfit and arrived at the dining for breakfast. As they ate, the chubby lady encouraged Yang to study for the upcoming exam and not mind those at school who made fun of him. However, she immediately noticed our guy chubbing down a bowl of milk like a starved bulldog, which left her horrified. She was both scared and shocked at the disgusting sight because her real son didn't lack table manners like the horror before her eyes. After the weird breakfast, Yang headed off to school. Once outside, he stared intently, as it had been ages since he last saw the world beyond the four walls of the psychiatric hospital. With Yang's memories still fresh in his mind, he boarded the bus heading toward the school. Inside, he sat like any normal person and noticed a pink-haired girl entering the bus. The pinky was shorter than Kevin Hart, and her hands couldn't reach the bus grab handle, so being a gentle madman, our boy offered his seat to the midget, which made her smile. Just then, a guy with more piercings than sense named Hao, a classmate of Yang's, noticed this and walked up, demanding the seat he had asked Yang to save for him. Before Yang could respond, Ho grabbed his chin and slapped him with both hands. In that moment, Yang had a brief flashback. Normally, the old gang would have cowered in fear, pleading not to be hit, but this Yang gave Hao an intimidating glare. The look sent shivers down Hao's spine, and he began to sweat faster than a rugby player in a match. At that moment, a random guy suddenly burst into the bus, his shirt smeared with blood, shouting that a murderer was after him and demanding the driver floor the gas pedal. Then, a bald man entered, holding 2 kitchen knives and threatening to chop everyone up like an onion. The passengers were terrified, assuming he was a deranged lunatic who had escaped from an asylum. But Yang remained as calm as Jason Statham, knowing that this guy wasn't nearly as mad as he was. The bald man fixed his gaze on the frightened pink-haired girl and lunged at her with one of his knives. But Lin Fan caught the knife with his bare hand, blood dripping, and calmly asked the bald man why he wanted to attack the girl. Shocked, the bald man screamed at Yang to let go of the knife. Meanwhile, everyone on the bus, including the bully Hao, watched in fear and disbelief. Finally, the bald man released the knife, stepped back and collapsed in terror, asking Yang if he was a psycho. But Yang, still calm, demanded to know why he had tried to harm the innocent girl. A few minutes later, the ambulance arrived at the scene, and everyone quickly fled the bus. The pink-haired girl was rescued just in time before she could become minced meat. Still inside, however, were Yang and the bald murderer, who was now terrified at the sight of the man standing before him, holding his knives. Yang, gripping both knives, casually asked the bald guy if he wanted them back, but the man was too petrified to respond. Smiling, Yang stepped off the bus, emerging as the hero of the situation. He approached Hao, who was on the ground, terrified, jumped up at the sight of Yang. Yang then offered a handshake with his bloody hands to reintroduce himself, but Hao's face was in total horror at the sight of Yang. However, with no choice, still trembling, Hao stretched his hands for the shake. When their palms touched, he felt something sticky, and instantly realized the handshake was a bloody one that froze his soul. Just then, a nurse hurried over to Yang, bandaging his wounded hand and complimenting him on how tough he was for staying calm despite the blood dripping from his palm. Our guy, unfazed, replied that he loved pain because it was perfect for his cultivation. Hearing this, the nurse smiled because tough eyes raised her up the most. Meanwhile, the cops had handcuffed the bald-headed criminal and were leading him to the police car. As they walked, the bald guy screamed that he wasn't the only crazy one. They had let the truly insane person go, hinting at Yang. One of the officers then approached Yang, thanking him for his brave actions and promising to inform his school so he could be praised for his heroism. But Yang waved him off, explaining that he needed to get to school because he was already late. The cop was taken aback and smiled, impressed by Yang's dedication, having never seen a Gen Z student so serious about school, even after suffering such a severe injury. Soon after, Yang arrived at school. The place felt familiar to him, like it was his own memory, even though it was the school Yang used to attend. As he walked through the campus, he briefly wondered whether his friend and roommate, Zhang, would make a good acupuncture teacher since he liked playing with needles. But he quickly isekai the thought because Zhang would only end up sticking needles into all the kids behind. Shortly after, Yang walked into the school building and made his way to class. He pulled out a chair, sat down, and rested his head on the desk, lost in thought about his younger days. He recalled how the principal had told his mother that he couldn't continue his education due to his mental health issues, which had devastated her. His moment of reflection was abruptly interrupted when he felt a sharp poke on his arm with a pencil. A pink-haired girl named Lee Su demanded that he remove his hands from the desk, claiming he was crossing the line. Normally, when the old gang was stabbed that way, he would scream in pain, jump up from his seat, and act like a scared little sissy. But this time, the reincarnated Yang simply stared at her as if she was gently massaging his hands, which confused Lee Su. Determined to break his composure, she pressed the pencil deeper into his skin, expecting him to cry out. To her utter shock, Yang remained unbothered and casually mentioned that they used to play this kind of game at the hospital. Hearing this, Lee Su's expression twisted in horror, wondering what kind of hospital Yang was talking about. She pressed even deeper, drawing blood, but Lin Fan remained calm, his head still resting on the desk as though nothing was happening. Startled, Lee Su checked the wound, seeing blood oozing from the punctured spot. Horrified, she fled the scene. Meanwhile, across the room, a blue-haired guy who had been watching the whole situation leaned over to Hao and informed him that Yang was bullying his crush, Lee Su. Hao, still shaken, pretended not to hear a word the idiot had just said. The blue-haired guy edged closer, suggesting they drag Yang to the bathroom and teach him a lesson by beating him senseless. But Hao, already terrified, told him to leave Yang alone, claiming that something was off with him that day. The blue-haired guy scoffed, dismissing Hao's fear, saying Yang was just a weak femboy, and there was nothing strange about him. Just then, Yang approached them and extended his hand to the blue-haired guy for a handshake. The blue-haired dude cringed, calling Yang an idiotic sissy who didn't deserve a handshake from alpha males. To his surprise, Hao quickly stood up, faster than a low-ranking soldier before a commander, and shook Yang's hand. Yang smiled, telling Hao he remembered him from the bus earlier. After the handshake, Yang walked away, leaving the blue-haired guy fuming at Hao for acting like a sissy in front of the school's mighty weakling. Later that day in class, the literature teacher asked everyone to recite an ode they had been assigned to memorize. The room fell silent as no one had memorized it. The teacher, in frustration, singled out Yang, expecting him to crumble under the pressure. Yang had always feared this particular old hag more than anyone else. The class braced themselves, expecting Yang to panic like usual. But to everyone's astonishment, he calmly stood up and admitted he hadn't memorized the ode. The class was left speechless, wondering where Yang had suddenly found the courage. At that moment, the teacher stared at Yang and noticed his eyes looked unnervingly strange, making her suspect something was off about him. Yang smiled, asking if he could sit down, and even his smile sent chills down her spine. Shaken, she told him to sit. The whole class was left dumbfounded, wondering why the normally strict teacher, feared by the entire school, had suddenly gone soft on Yang. Hours later, the class was dismissed. While the other students relaxed, Yang crouched by a wall and attempted to stick a metal key into one of the electrical sockets. The blue-haired guy from earlier approached, asking why Yang was acting so weird and why he had suddenly become so bold, intimidating both his friend and even the feared teacher. But Yang ignored him completely like yesterday's infested bread, which infuriated the blue-haired dude. Furious, he grabbed Yang by the collar, threatening to beat the crap out of him for brushing him off. Yang simply turned to him and calmly explained that all he wanted to do was stick the key into the socket, believing that the electric current would help cultivate his body and make him stronger. Hearing this, the blue-haired guy yelled at Yang, daring him to prove he had balls of steel by actually doing it. Without a second thought, Yang inserted the key into the socket. Instantly, both he and the blue-haired guy, still holding onto Yang's shirt, were electrocuted, their bodies jerking uncontrollably from the electric current. One clueless student, watching them convulsing, thought they were performing the latest TikTok dance trend, the Big Stepper. So he eagerly joined in and also got electrocuted. Two more glorified donkeys, equally oblivious, spotted the boys dancing and rushed over to join the supposed trend, only to receive the same VIP treatment. A few minutes later, Yang, unfazed, decided that the school's electric current wasn't strong enough to cultivate his body the way he wanted, so he pulled the key out of the socket. That moment, the other boys, whose nervous systems were completely fried, collapsed to the ground like discarded toys. Yang, seeing them sprawled out, assumed they had all fallen asleep from exhaustion. Without a second thought, he leaped over them and headed to the bathroom, deciding to let them rest peacefully. Just then, the clueless mathematics teacher, thrilled to introduce the class to a new topic, trigonometry, burst into the classroom. His excitement quickly turned to horror when he saw the sight of his students lying unconscious on the floor, their skin charred and burnt. He dropped his notes in shock and immediately called 911, reporting the grisly scene at the school. Soon, multiple ambulances arrived at the school, and from the bathroom window, Yang watched as the unconscious students were carried out one by one for medical treatment. His mind, operating on a 2B logic, assumed the students had simply fallen ill from studying too hard. He concluded that the school must be a terrible place for any sane kid to attend. Several hours later, as the school day ended, students gathered outside, gossiping about the shocking incident of the electrocuted boys in Class 2. They whispered about how all but one had been affected, the one who had been in the toilet at the time. Meanwhile, as our guy made his way home, he heard someone call this name. He turned to see a girl as mid as a plain bagel hiding awkwardly behind a tree. Curious, Yang demanded to know why she was calling him. The girl, visibly flustered, avoided eye contact as her cheeks turned red with embarrassment. Just as she was about to speak, a golden-haired bully named Tongji and his two ugly-faced minions appeared, snatching the pink letter the girl had been hiding behind her back. Tongji sneered, asking if the girl had written a love letter to Yang. Desperate, the girl demanded he returns the letter, but Tongji held it high above her head, mocking Yang, calling him a rissless weeb who had somehow become popular enough to get love letters from girls. The girl jumped, trying to grab the letter, but Tongji kept it just out of reach. In an instant, faster than lightning, Yang leaped up and snatched the letter from Tongji's grip, leaving him stunned. Yang, holding the letter, asked why Tongji had taken it. Tongji, recovering from his surprise, growled that Yang had suddenly become bold enough to snatch things from his hand. He then told Yang that if he wanted to walk away unharmed, he had to read the letter aloud. Yang, calm and composed, turned to the girl and asked if she wanted him to read the letter out loud for everyone to hear. Terrified, the girl shook her head in disapproval. Yang, respecting her wish, turned back to Tongji and his gang, stating flatly that he was not reading the letter. Hearing this, Tongji's face contorted with fury. He slammed his fist against the tree, leaving a deep dent just above Yang's head, and demanded he repeat what he had just said. As Yang was about to do so, the girl, now squatting down in fear, covering her ears, screamed at him to read the letter so he wouldn't get beaten to a pulp again. One of Tongji's goons whistled, taunting Yang, telling him to do as the scared girl had said or face the consequences. But Yang remained unfazed. He shook his head, refusing again, and calmly told Tongji that since he was stronger than them, he didn't have to listen to their threats. That statement sent Tongji into a boiling rage. Noticing that Yang had raised his fist, Tongji, seething with disbelief, demanded to know what had given Yang the nerve to act so boldly. Before Tongji could finish his sentence, Yang casually slammed his fist against the tree behind him. Just then, the tree cracked and split in two, crashing down with a thunderous noise. Even Tongji and his goons, who had thought they'd seen it all, stood frozen in shock and total disbelief. They were speechless. No one could believe what they had just witnessed, a feat that even the great Saitama would struggle to accomplish. As this was ongoing, two students from Yang's class, who had been watching the scene, rushed inside the school building to inform a male teacher about the situation. When the teacher heard that Yang was being bullied again by those ugly cows, he was furious. He threatened to beat Tongji and his lackeys until they convulsed and stormed toward the exit with the two students to carry out his threat. However, when they reached the scene, what they saw nearly made their fragile brain implode. Yang had pinned Tongji to the tree, and the once fearsome bully was trembling like a drenched kitten. His two minions stood nearby with their heads bowed in respect to Yang. The teacher and students couldn't believe their eyes. Yang, as calm as ever, stared down at Tongji and told him to repeat after him. It's not right to snatch things from people. Terrified, Tang-ji obeyed without hesitation. Then, Yang told him to promise that he would always ask for permission before taking something from others. After glancing at the remains of the tree, Tang-ji quickly repeated the words, his voice shaky with fear. Satisfied, Yang patted Tang-ji's cheek with the pink letter and told them to scram. Tang-ji and his boys bolted away faster than you would say Teen Rocket. The teacher, still trying to piece together what he had just witnessed, turned to the two students in utter confusion and asked if his senses were playing tricks on him. He was sure Yang was supposed to be the victim, but from what he saw, Yang had been the one doing the bullying. The students shook their heads in disbelief, confirming that what they saw was real. Meanwhile, Yang handed the pink letter back to the girl, who shyly mentioned that the letter was meant to be read by him. Yang, nonchalant, replied that his friend Zhang had told him any pink letter was likely a love letter. Blushing, the girl confirmed it was true, admitting that she was head over heels for him. But to her shock, the top G calmly rejected her confession, stating that he preferred to spend his time cultivating his powers instead of chasing Espillos. His words shattered the poor girl's heart into a million pieces. Her eyes widened in disbelief at the rejection, and she ran off, calling Yang a bastard who wasn't worthy of her love. Yang watched her run away without a trace of emotion, and then wondered why women were harder to decipher than a Rubik's Cube. The teacher, who had initially come to rescue Yang, stood in disbelief, pushing the two students to go home since no rescue had actually been needed. Later on, as Yang walked home, he'd experienced a flashback of the real Yang's past life. The real Yang had been tender-hearted, with a love for cute things and a gentle demeanor. Unfortunately, these beta male qualities had made him the target of mockery at school, where everyone called him a weak weirdo. However, the girl whose love Yang had just rejected had been the only one who admired his gentle nature and treated him with kindness. Because of her sweet behavior toward him, the real Yang had secretly fallen in love with her, dreaming that one day he would gather the courage to confess his feelings and make her his first love. He had prayed to the universe for that moment, yearning for his first girlfriend. But when the moment finally arrived, it wasn't the real Yang anymore. His body had been taken over by Lin Fan, who rejected her, shattering any hope of a future romance between them. Meanwhile, later at the hospital, the doctor and nurse were attending to one of the electrocuted boys. The doctor didn't understand what in the world the lads were thinking to get themselves electrocuted to this degree instead of studying. As he ordered the nurse to cut off the shirt of the fried boy because they needed immediate surgery, the foolish boy screamed, telling the doctor not to cut his expensive Armani shirt that he spent months washing dishes to afford and then passed out. The doctor stared at him in annoyance, squeezing his cheek and telling him if he played such a dangerous game again, he would be wearing his Armani shirt in hell with the devil in matching outfit. Few hours later, the electrocuted boys all lay on the hospital bed, bandaged and screaming in excruciating pain from the burn. They soon began to ask themselves what might have caused them to be electrocuted this way, since they just participated in a trending TikTok dance. They then remembered that they all got electrocuted after they touched Zishan, the blue-haired bully from earlier on. Hearing this accusation, Zishan shouted at them that he wasn't at fault, and that he also got shot when he patted Yang on the shoulder after the dude said he was going to stick his key into the socket hole, and he never thought the idiot would do it for real. With this revelation, the boys wondered where the architect of the mayhem would be, since they could not find Yang anywhere. Zishan then informed them that Yang must be in the emergency room fighting for his life, since they were in this shape. Surely Yang must be barely clinging to his life if he is not dead already. Just then, the boys concluded Zishan must be right and decided to hold a 1-minute silence for the dead and prayed God to accept his sissy soul. That moment, they heard a knock at the door, and they immediately thought it would be the doctor or their parents who had come to check on them. However, when the door opened, Yang looked inside the room, and the boy's entire body was frozen in horror when they realized Yang was well and kicking just fine. Our boy walked in and mentioned that he had been looking everywhere in the hospital for them, and as their classmate, he was so worried they were in this condition after they felt ill from studying so hard. As Yang dropped the treats he had bought for them, the dudes were petrified and wondered how the heck Yang was not only alive but looking all fine. Shortly afterward, Yang brought out the milk and ham sausage he had brought for them and handed one to Zishan. But the dude rejected his food, telling him he didn't give two shit about his food, and he also didn't want no handout from him. Just then, another purple-haired guy accepted the food, telling Yang not to pay any attention to the proud, skinny guy or his sassy mouth. Hearing this, Zishan yelled at him, asking why he was accepting anything from Yang, and if the electric current had also fried his brain, turning him into a fool. Just then, another dude holding the phone alerted the rest to what was posted in the school's WhatsApp for the elites only, which made him tremble. In the group, someone had posted a picture of Yang when he pinned Tong Ji, the school's notorious bully, to the tree. Seeing that, the already petrified boys, who were now scared to death and trembling, thanked Yang for the courtesy of bringing them gifts. Meanwhile, on the rooftop of the hospital building, a cancer patient stood, reflecting on his miserable life. His wife, who was once the love of his life, had recently served him divorce papers, leaving him for another man since she assumed he would die soon anyway. Without her by his side, the world had become meaningless to him. With that thought in mind, he jumped from the roof, intending to end it all. At the same time, inside the hospital room, Yang was chatting with the boys, who had asked him to show how big the tree was that he had cracked in half earlier at school. Suddenly, the boys noticed something falling rapidly from above. Alarmed, they shouted in fear, realizing that someone was plummeting from the rooftop. Instantly, Yang's reflexes kicked in, and with a move worthy of Spider-Man himself, he leaped to the window and grabbed the man's hand just in time. With incredible strength, Yang pulled the man back inside the room, shocking the boys. They couldn't believe that Yang had saved the man with just one hand, a feat that seemed superhuman. Once inside, Yang asked the man why he had attempted to end his life. The distraught man broke down in tears, telling Yang about his terminal illness and how his wife had left him for a younger, more attractive dude. In his mind, there was no reason left to live. Yang, without judgment, gently patted the man on the head and said, "It's okay to cry and let out your emotions. You've been holding too much inside." The man, overwhelmed by Yang's calm and supportive demeanor, grabbed Yang's leg and sobbed uncontrollably while Yang continued to comfort him. Just then, hospital staff, including doctors and orderlies, rushed into the room, having heard rumors that someone had been saved from a suicide attempt. Upon arriving, they realized the story was true. As the orderlies prepared to take the man away for care, one of the boys noticed that Yang's arm, which had pulled the man to safety, was severely broken and bleeding profusely. Horror spread across the boys' faces as they realized the extent of Yang's injury. However, our boy calmly told the doctor he would be fine once the broken bone was set, and he was used to things like this. Hearing this, the doctor and his orderlies were in utter disbelief, wondering what they just heard. Sometime later, back at school, the elite WhatsApp group was buzzing with admiration for Yang. The boys had begun calling him the Gen Z god of war, sharing stories of his fearless actions. Even Tong Ji, the notorious school bully, posted in the group, saying he would love to be Yang's subordinate from now on. As Yang was wheeled into the operating room for surgery on his broken arm, he tried to explain that he didn't need any anesthesia or surgery, stating that enduring the pain would strengthen his mind and make him more resilient. The doctor and nurse, utterly perplexed by his words, figured he must be delirious from blood loss. Before Yang could protest further, trying to explain that he couldn't afford the anesthesia because he was a broke chicka-chat, the doctor injected him with anesthetic, and he fell asleep faster than a newborn. As soon as Yang drifted into unconsciousness, the world system activated in his mind. The system informed him that the people around his target had fewer ill intentions towards him, meaning he had completed the mission successfully. As a reward for his excellence, the system bestowed upon him the highest cultivation method along with a Chai cultivation technique, with an additional bonus for receiving an S-rank evaluation. Without hesitation, the system initiated a countdown, and within 3 seconds, he was instantly teleported back into his original body as Lin Fan in the psychiatric hospital. Lin Fan, now back in his own body, opened his eyes and found Zhang staring at him intently. He quickly remembered the last conversation they'd had, where Zhang had asked about the voice Lin Fan had claimed to hear. Still dazed, Lin Fan proceeded to explain all the events that had transpired in the alternate world he'd been teleported to, including his wild adventures as Yang and the epic moments that had unfolded. Simultaneously, back to the hidden world, the real Yang was back to his rightful body with his mom sitting close to him while he lay on the hospital bed. Waking up, his sissy attribute was instantly activated, and he cried like a girl from the excruciating pain in his operated broken arm. The following day, the real Yang got to school and was nervous because he assumed it was going to be another day of intense bullying, and wished his mom was with him to accompany him inside the school. When he finally summoned the courage to get inside the school, he was faced with students waiting for him and his bullies leading the pack. That moment, The school radio outside the school loudly announced that the entire institution was expressing gratitude to him for saving lives. With that, he was sweating cold and almost froze the spot. However, to his utter dismay, all the students, including the bullies, knelt before him like kings, making packs in the middle for him to walk. As he walked the pact in the middle, he was filled with intense fear and confusion, wondering what the heck was going on in the school. Meanwhile, the rejected chick, who had earlier handed him a love letter, stayed in her usual spot, hiding behind a tree. She stretched her hands to get his attention, but soon realized that the dude was no more at her level, as he was now a legend in the school, while she remained an ordinary baddie. The story shifts to the special department building, where arguments arose that the monsters were getting clever. Inside the building, a guy named Pachin, a level 9 warrior, shouted that it was impossible, while another old dude beside him was just fed up with life in general. The old dude, who was fed up with life, named Daoming, butt into the conversation and pointed out that since monsters were getting clever, it was certain that humans would all be eliminated soon. With that, there was actually no need for this meeting, as everyone needed to just go home, make a will, and prepare for the worst. But the man seated at the head of the table said the whole situation should be taken as a joke. A lady named Kin Song urged them to think deeply about the consequences of the monsters actually becoming intelligent if it was true. However, the leader of the group furiously slammed the table with his fist, telling them it wasn't just an assumption but an actual fact that had been proven by the research lab. Another old bald man with more beards than IQ named Master Yongsan then remarked that their only hope would be to surrender to Buddha, but the leader silenced his mouth. The leader named One-Eyed then pointed out that with the monsters getting clever, warriors on the same level might not be able to defeat them, hence putting the entire city in danger. Daoming interrupted, saying if the warriors were no match for the monsters, then old men like him would do it, since it was better to die fighting than to die of boredom. However, he would have preferred they all go home to make a will. Getting infuriated with the old ugly fool's continuous insistence on riding Will One-Eyed, the most powerful warrior in the city blasted him with mystic energy to silence him forever. Before long, at the psychiatric hospital, Director Hao celebrated his birthday with the hospital staff cheering him. The old director, smiling then, thanked them for celebrating another year with them without him kicking the bucket. Hearing this, the staffs clapped for him, saying it was good to be alive, and he was one tough fellow. After that, the old Hao closed his eyes and wished that all he wanted was for the day to go smoothly for his birthday party. However, his wish was useless, as the staff announced that the patients in Ward 666 had rallied other patients and were causing trouble in the cafeteria. Meanwhile, at the cafeteria, Lin Fan, Zhang, and other patients held up placards that said they didn't need food but needed those diagrams drawn on the placards. The patients returned the egg and sausage given to them, shaking their heads that they didn't need them and that all they needed was the diagram drawn on the placard, which left the kitchen staff stunned and wondering what was drawn on the placard that they needed. Soon after, the director arrived with his orderlies, and he was shown the placard depicting what they needed. Seeing the rubbish drawn on the placard, Ho initially refused to yield to the demands of the patients, but when they rolled on the floor and whined like kids, he had no option but to give in, instructing the orderlies to go to the storehouse and give the patients what they were demanding. Hearing this, the orderlies were stunned and wondered what in heaven's name the crazy patients were demanding. Later that day, in Ward 666, Lin Fan and Zhang were given heavy dumbbells and a punching bag, which they trained with to cultivate their bodies. After hours of intense training, the punching bag was torn, and its contents spilled while the dumbbell was twisted, as if it were used by Hulk himself. With this, Zhang informed Lin Fan that after that training, he had become a qualified warrior under his guidance, and then thanked him for being a nice guy underneath the psychosis. Meanwhile, deep in the sewers, an explosion shook the ground, sending red-eyed rats scurrying for safety. A young man leaped high into the air, casting a spell that summoned 3 scrolls, each of which exploded in different parts of a level 2 giant monstrous zombie dog. Despite the attack, the ferocious zombie dog continued its advance toward the group of university warriors who had come to eliminate it. At that moment, Xiang Yang the mage cast a yellow pill healing spell that enhanced the abilities of the team's swordsman. In response, the swordsman recited a magic chant, unleashing a mystic sword that impaled the zombie dog's arm, causing it to roar in agony. The wounded beast glanced at the blade lodged in its arm before turning its furious gaze toward the warriors. Without hesitation, it attacked, swiping its massive, sharp paw. However, a bald mage with a magical bead summoned a larger version of himself to restrain the zombie dog's paw, preventing it from inflicting harm. This enraged the beast, causing it to glow with a red aura. It lifted its sharp claws, ready to strike, but the swordsman suddenly realized that the zombie dog wasn't attacking randomly. It had a target, Xiaoying the mage. Unfortunately, it was too late. The beast's claws slammed into Xiaoying, sending her crashing into the sewer wall, coughing up blood from severe internal injuries. Realizing the monster had the intelligence to target the healer first, the swordsman ordered one of the team members to get Xiaoying out of the beast's reach. Summoning 3 lightning scrolls, the swordsman blasted the zombie dog, but the attack only made it angrier. The beast then bared its teeth in a vicious grin, causing the bald mage to sweat nervously. In a blink, the monstrous dog shattered the larger version of the bald mage's barrier and tore through his upper body, leaving only his legs behind in a pool of blood. Seeing this gruesome sight, the rest of the team was paralyzed with horror. But before they could process what had just happened, another team member was stabbed in the chest by the beast's sharp claws. The swordsman, now panicking, called out to Xiaoying, urging her to move toward the exit and leave the beast to him. Gathering all her strength, Xiaoying cast a rank 2 dark pill healing spell, boosting the swordsman's power. Immediately after, she succumbed to her injuries and died. Despite the powerful combo attack, the zombie dog swatted the glowing sword aside and pinned the swordsman to the ground with its massive claw. While trapped, the wounded swordsman mustered the last of his strength to cast a blood spell, determined to take the beast down with him. With this spell, he channeled his inner Super Saiyan, which was glowing with a golden aura that even Goku would envy. Moments later, the swordsman exploded, leaving the beast writhing in excruciating pain. The scene then shifts back to the psychiatric hospital, where the patients are enjoying their best lives in the garden. Zhang lay on the green field counting ants, while Lin Fan assumed a yoga pose, channeling his inner energy and emitting a glowing aura. Suddenly, the world system popped up, congratulating him and informing him that he had reached the human level of QE cultivation. With this level, he could now absorb energy from both heaven and earth. At that moment, Lin Fan began sweating profusely while Zhang tried to get his attention, pointing out an ant that appeared to be crying. When Lin Fan didn't respond, Zhang turned and noticed his face was redder than a tomato, wondering if Lin Fan was unwell. The system then issued a distress warning, alerting Lin Fan that he had exceeded the energy capacity a host could safely contain. If he continued, he would eventually explode. Acting quickly, Zhang leaned toward Lin Fan and poked his forehead with a needle, causing blood to spurt out. Not stopping there, the psychopath poked multiple points on Lin Fan's head with needles. The intense pain became unbearable for Lin Fan, and as his face grew even redder, he suddenly let out a scream so loud it sounded like he was being castrated. This startled Zhang, who jumped back in shock. Moments later, Lin Fan regained consciousness and thanked Zhang for his unique acupuncture skills, admitting that without them, he might have exploded like an atomic bomb. Hearing that he had been helpful, Zhang was overjoyed, his eyes lighting up with excitement that his acupuncture had actually worked. Lin Fan smiled, complimenting Zhang on his skills, but quickly pointed out another problem: he was starving. Upon hearing this, Zhang had a brilliant idea, one that no man born of a woman had ever conceived. He picked up the crying ant and offered it to Lin Fan, telling him that the ant dish was the finest delicacy known only to geniuses like Andrew Tate. Just as Lin Fan was about to eat the poor four-legged creature, an announcement rang out, declaring that food was ready and all patients should head to the hospital canteen. The timely announcement saved the innocent ant, which was discarded back on the grass. Once inside the canteen, the patients watched in amazement as Lin Fan devoured all the food like Po and Kung Fu Panda. However, Zhang assured them that Lin Fan would soon spit the chewed food out just in time for them to enjoy a nice lunch. The patients, unfazed, agreed they were fine with that. But just as Lin Fan was about to overindulge, a nurse arrived in time to stop our guy from ending himself with excessive food. She then tried to take the food tray from him, but Lin Fan clung to it, still eating. The nurse then called for the doctor. The doctor arrived, looked at Lin Fan, and declared that not only was Lin Fan mad, but he now had a serious eating disorder. As the doctor spoke, Lin Fan began chewing the spoon, which shocked the nurse. The doctor then revised his diagnosis, saying Lin Fan's condition was worse than he initially thought. At that moment, the system popped up again, informing Lin Fan that he could now absorb energy from heaven and earth every minute to strengthen his body. However, the downside was that he would get hungry quickly unless he consumed vast amounts of energy. Meanwhile, back in the sewers, investigators from the Special Department Unit took pictures of the massacred warrior group that had been annihilated by the monstrous dog. The team collected evidence from the gruesome scene. Among them was the leader of the city's warriors, the one-eyed man, who was clearly displeased as he surveyed the horrific aftermath. He then made a call to a random contact, informing them that the victims of the massacre were the best students from the institution. He added that the monsters in the city had become much smarter, which would soon become a serious problem for the city. Even the warriors of the city were no longer capable of handling the monsters at this level. The person on the other end of the call asked where the monster was at that moment. Hearing this, the one-eyed man threw his cigarette to the ground and replied that the beast was using the disgusting stench of the sewers to mask its scent, but it was definitely wounded. He ended the call and turned to one of the special investigative officers, a guy wearing glasses, telling him they needed to raise the monster's threat level so everyone could understand just how dangerous it had become. The investigator then asked what they should do about the families of the massacred students. The one-eyed man responded, telling him to clean up the bodies and belongings of the students, send them to their families, and let them know that their kids were brave warriors despite having acted recklessly. Meanwhile, back at the psychiatric hospital, one of the orderlies burst into Director Ho's office, delivering bad news. One of the patients from Ward 666 had frightened the female kitchen staff, causing them to faint. Hearing this, Director Ho nearly had a heart attack and asked the orderly to explain what had happened again, more clearly this time. It turned out that a few hours earlier in the canteen, the doctor had ordered the egg-shaped head orderlies to restrain Lin Fan and take him to the emergency room for a proper examination. As they dragged Lin Fan across the canteen floor, he winked at Zhang, who immediately understood the assignment. Zhang then had a brilliant idea to save his best friend. Noticing the distress Lin Fan was in, his eyes sparkled, and he began banging his head violently on the table, drawing everyone's attention. The commotion was so intense that the bald orderlies abandoned Lin Fan and rushed to prevent Zhang from further injuring his already damaged brain. Seizing the opportunity, Lin Fan quietly slipped out of the canteen. Before leaving, he gave Zhang a thumbs up for his quick thinking, to which Zhang enthusiastically returned the gesture. In the kitchen, two elderly women were preparing meals as usual. To their horror, Lin Fan suddenly entered the room, searching for food. But in her imagination, Lin Fan was no longer a mere patient, but a bloodthirsty zombie with eyes full of Levi-like bloodlust. Recognizing him as the dreaded patient from Ward 666, and believing him to now be a ravenous monster, the women screamed in terror and fainted from shock. Back in the present, after hearing the orderly's account of the incident, Director Ho instructed him to add $300 to the women's compensation. He then began to wonder why Lin Fan had suddenly become so ravenous. The young orderly replied that Dr. Wong was still examining the cause of his excessive hunger. Meanwhile, outside the psychiatric hospital, something far more sinister was unfolding. The wounded zombie dog, having emerged from the sewer, decided to rest and recover in the area, as there were no warriors nearby. It was the perfect place to regain its strength. The wounded beast dog then slunk into a dark alley, realizing that in order to heal and recover, it needed food. With a sinister smile, it concluded that humans would be the perfect solution. However, to lure humans in, it needed a disguise. Cackling maliciously, the beast transformed into a cute cub, perfect for deceiving unsuspecting humans into becoming its meal. With its new appearance, the cub headed toward the psychiatric hospital, muttering to itself that humans were foolish and easy to trick. Meanwhile, inside the hospital ward, Lin Fan and Zhang sat on the bed. Zhang complained that his expensive watch was broken again and needed to be fixed, but he was flat broke. Lin Fan sympathized, saying he didn't have any money either. Ever the genius, Zhang suggested they kidnap someone for ransom to fix the watch. Lin Fan asked who they would kidnap, and Zhang proposed they kidnap Lin Fan's girlfriend, the news reporter from earlier, and force her to fix the watch before letting her go. Lin Fan clarified that the reporter was no longer his girlfriend but his wife. Zhang, however, shrugged it off, stating they don't kidnap wives here, only girlfriends. Just then, they heard a soft puppy bark. Looking out the window, they spotted the zombie dog disguised as a cute cub. The demonic cub stared back, putting on its most adorable expression to lure them in. Seeing the little creature, clearly wounded with blood in its ears, Lin Fan and Zhang were captivated by how cute it looked. Deciding to help, they'd brought the cub inside and laid it on the bed. Zhang, ever eager to show off his acupuncture skills, announced that he would treat the cub's wounds. Hearing this, the cub was excited that he would be receiving world-class treatment from an expert acupuncturist. However, his excitement shattered when his forehead was pierced with a needle, totally paralyzing his limbs and giving him unbearable pain. The beast cub began to wonder what kind of treatment he was receiving, but before he could complete his thoughts, he heard Zhang talking about stabbing another part of his body. The cub was shocked and began to beg in his mind that he didn't want the treatment anymore. But in the blink of an eye, Zhang went ahead and stabbed every inch of the cub's body, making him completely weak and sprawl in the bed helpless. Just then, Lin Fan's stomach began to growl, so Zhang asked if he was hungry again. He replied, telling him that, unfortunately, he had been feeling hungry all day. That moment, the system appeared before his eyes and informed him that there was a powerful energy carrier with them, and consuming it would satisfy his hunger for 3 days. Hearing this, Lin Fan stared intently at the beast cub, and the system informed him that the cub was a level 2 energy carrier and was totally edible. All he had to do was apply salt and roast. With this, Lin Fan continued to stare at the cub and then informed Zhang that the cub was very cute. Both men soon started to stare ominously at the cub, that it wasn't only cute, it also looked delicious. On the other hand, the cub looked at them and didn't understand why the maniacs were staring at him like a falling star and calling him cute and delicious, since both words didn't go together in the same sentence. As the intensity of Lin Fan and Zhang's stares grew, the demonic cub finally realized that these two men genuinely intended to eat him. The realization hit like a ton of bricks, and the cub began to sweat profusely, thinking how absurd it was that humans would actually consider devouring something as cute as himself. Before the cub could even formulate a plan of escape, Zhang swiftly pulled the needles from its head, remarking that acupuncture wasn't necessary since the cub would soon meet its end. Both men believed that the best course of action was to simply wait until the cub bled out, and then they could cook it. Hearing this, the demonic cub knew these men were completely crazy, but reassured himself that before they would have the pleasure of eating him, his body would have healed automatically. Just then, Zhang began to pet his cute head, telling him to RIP and have a peaceful transition to heaven. But the dog only stared at them, knowing he would definitely not be the first to see heaven. Zhang soon began to worry why the dog hadn't still bled out yet, but Lin Fan informed him to chill and then pointed to Zhang that the cub had started to bleed out, which excited Zhang that they would eventually eat the cub sooner than later. Zhang even asked Lin Fan to give him the leg of the cub, and Lin Fan responded, telling him sure he could have the leg since all parts of the cub looked sumptuous. At that moment, the demonic dog wasn't having any more of the bully, so it transformed back to its brutal self, telling them they had gone too far for planning to eat a cute creature. The dog beast, who had been angry at the torture he received all in the name of treatment, moved to attack Lin Fan and Zhang. However, seeing the transformation only excited Zhang that now the meat was big enough to go around for them to eat. That statement only pissed the beast further, so he opened his mouth wide full of sharp fangs to eat Zhang whole. But our boy immediately made an impressive move, grabbing the teeth of the beast, eating him to the ground, and pinning him there. Lin Fan told the beast dog that it was bad manners to try to bite people and that he was a bad dog. The dog didn't understand what had just happened and how our guy had intercepted his attack, but he got up almost immediately from the ground and decided to crush his skinny hands with his teeth. He instantly realized that his bite was only scratching his itchy hands. On the other hand, Zhang remarked that the beast was cute, and he wanted to stroke his fluffy fur, so Lin Fan told him to go ahead since the dog was obedient now. But the dog was angry at the humiliation of being treated like a common dog when he was a level 2 monster. So, as Zhang tried petting him, the beast tried to bite his hands off, but Lin Fan effortlessly broke the teeth of the beast, causing his gums to bleed. Lin Fan told the beast that he had warned him earlier not to try biting people, much less his friend. The beast dog lay on the bed helpless, still in shock at what had just happened, while Zhang played with his fluffy skin. He had never encountered such a powerful human before and wondered what level Lin Fan must be to be able to subdue him so easily. The beast dog began to wonder whether Lin Fan was a level 2, level 3, or even a level 4 warrior. But he concluded that Lin Fan must be stronger than a level 4 warrior to have defeated him so easily. Meanwhile, Zhang continued to stroke the beast's fluffy fur and told Lin Fan that he would love to see the beast wag its fluffy tail. Lin Fan remarked that since the dog was obedient, it would definitely wag its tail. However, the dog initially refused, unwilling to act like a common pet. But with his life in danger, he decided to temporarily submit in order to survive the terrifying human. Zhang, still unsatisfied, wanted the dog to wag its tail in circles rather than side to side, but the beast was already tired of being bullied. Seeing that the dog wouldn't comply, Lin Fan grabbed its last surviving tooth tightly and commanded it to do as instructed, even giving the dog a pat on the head that nearly cracked its skull. Left with no choice, the beast dog spun its tail faster than a windmill, which delighted Zhang. Afterward, Zhang told Lin Fan that the dog was cute and big, to which Lin Fan interrupted, saying it was also very delicious. Zhang responded that with the size of the dog, there would certainly be enough meat for both of them, causing the beast dog to panic and sweat profusely. He still couldn't believe what he had just heard. Just then, Zhang mentioned that the problem now was how to cook the beast dog, as he preferred the meat fried with chilies. Lin Fan replied that although he would have preferred the meat cooked, the voice in his head was telling him that roasting it would be the best option. They immediately started pondering how to start a fire, which temporarily relieved the dog. But then Lin Fan glanced up at the ceiling and suggested to Zhang that an electric current might be perfect for roasting the beast dog. Zhang agreed, smiling with excitement, and reminded Lin Fan that the last time he used his electric current cultivation, the aroma of his flesh had been amazing, and the dog's meat would likely smell just as good. Upon hearing this, the beast dog was utterly shocked and realized that he had encountered devils instead of humans. Soon after, the guys connected the exposed wire to the beast dog and sent a massive surge of electric current through it, electrocuting the creature while Zhang and Lin Fan eagerly awaited the process to finish. Outside the ward, two other patients noticed the intense light emanating from Ward 666 as they watched through the window, assuming a lively party was going on inside. After several minutes of intense electrocution, Zhang cheerfully remarked that he could already smell the fragrant aroma of roasted meat, and Lin Fan noted that the roasting was almost complete. Meanwhile, the beast dog desperately struggled to free himself from the torture, but couldn't and began cursing the moment he had laid eyes on these two devils. At that moment, his soul literally ascended to meet his maker. With that, the guys cut open the beast's guts and happily devoured its tasty meat. At the same time, in the corridor outside Ward 666, a newly employed nurse named Liang approached to investigate why the hospital's lights had suddenly gone out. His colleague had suggested checking on the patients in Ward 666, as they were likely responsible for the blackout. As Liang neared the ward, he peered inside but couldn't see anything in the darkness, so he used his flashlight. That's when he spotted the guys holding the massive head of the beast dog, an image that nearly paralyzed his entire nervous system. Horrified, he stepped back in absolute terror. The guys gave him a cold, red-eyed stare and asked if he wanted to join them in the feast. But Liang, utterly terrified, threw away his flashlight and stumbled to the ground before bolting away faster than his legs could carry him, screaming all the way. A few minutes later, Director Hao and two orderlies dragged a frantic Liang back to Ward 666 to investigate what had happened. Liang insisted that he saw the ward psychos eating a beast's head. When they arrived, the light switch was functioning again, and as they flicked it on, Hao entered the room. To his shock, he found Lin Fan and Zhang sleeping peacefully in their beds, but what horrified him most was the sight of the giant beast's fur lying on the floor. Hao immediately tore out a handful of the animal's hair and was shocked to realize he was holding the actual fur of a level 2 monster. Though startled, he decided to play it cool and not raise any alarms. He asked Lin Fan and Zhang what they had been doing, to which Lin Fan casually replied that they had been sleeping. Still curious, Hao pressed further, asking if they had been in bed all day. Lin Fan responded no, but Zhang quickly interjected, insisting that they had in fact been sleeping all day. Liang, however, continued to insist that he had seen them eating a giant head, which frustrated Hao. Annoyed, he asked Liang what was under his quilt. Lin Fan, unfazed, said he wasn't hiding anything and even threw his quilt aside to prove his point. Hao, now thoroughly exasperated, rubbed his forehead and told Lin Fan to take out the light shining from under his pants. Lin Fan complied, pulling out a flashlight and handing it to Hao, who promptly turned it off. Hao wanted to interrogate them further, but the boys quickly lay back down on their beds, telling him they needed to sleep and wished him good night. Hao, sighing in frustration, couldn't believe that because of these two nutjobs, his hair had turned completely gray by the age of 54. The stress was making him look older than he actually was. With that, Hao and the others left the room, switching off the light on their way out. As soon as they were gone, the boys sat up almost immediately. Zhang asked Lin Fan if he felt full after the tasty meat they had just eaten. Lin Fan replied that he was, but he had a problem. He asked Zhang why the director always seemed to find the things he hid, but never found Zhang's needles. Zhang winked and told him it was because he was smarter. He hid his stuff in his long white hair. This revelation made Lin Fan wonder if he should grow his hair long too, just to hide things better. At that moment, the system appeared, congratulating Lin Fan for eating a level 2 monster, which had increased his strength and agility. The scene then shifted to the headquarters of the city's special unit, where One-Eyed was smoking a blunt, angry that the families of the dead children were still mourning while the beast dog roamed free. All he wanted was to get his hands on that beast and crush it. Just then, he received a call. It was Director Hao from the psychiatric hospital. Hao told him that one of his patients had used the very monster dog One-Eyed was searching for as a rug. Hao then urged him to come to the hospital and see it for himself. One-Eyed, however, calmly dismissed the old geezer, remarking that old age was clearly affecting Hao's brain, as his words made no sense as a chicken trying to cross the road. Yet he decided there was no harm in checking it out, so he opened the window and jumped down from the high-rise building, still doubting whether he was making the right decision by meeting the old crackpot. Meanwhile, Liang, the nurse, was far from convinced and decided to continue his investigation outside the hospital building. He knew what he had seen and concluded there should be bones left somewhere. As he wandered around the hospital grounds, he stumbled upon the monster dog's skull and bones falling from a window, leaving him utterly stunned. As he stood there, petrified by the sight of the monstrous skull, he suddenly felt an eerie breeze sweep past his ear. The next moment, the giant skull mysteriously vanished, giving him the hardest shock of his young life. Overwhelmed, he literally gave up the ghost. At the same time, Director Hao was conducting his own investigation after reviewing the hospital's surveillance footage, which showed the beast dog emerging from a sewer hatch. As he peered down into the manhole, he heard a strange noise behind him. Turning around, he found himself face to face with the giant dog's skull, held by One-Eyed. One-Eyed asked if this was the level 2 monster he had been searching for and how it had died. Hao, somewhat exasperated, responded that he had already explained the whole story over the phone. Furious, One-Eyed threw the skull aside and told Hao it was impossible for ordinary people to have eliminated the monster, even if they were psychos. Hao calmly replied that the boys were far from ordinary, then handed him a book containing a detailed analysis of the patients in Ward 666, urging him to read it. As One-Eyed flipped through the pages, he was shocked by what he read. He asked Hao how it was possible for the patients to survive death over and over again. Hao simply replied that ordinary people wouldn't be that lucky. One-Eyed then inquired how the patients managed to annihilate the deadly monster dog. Hao replied, telling him that the boys had eaten the beast. Stunned by what he had just heard, One-Eyed told Hao that he would like to meet these geniuses in person. The following morning, the boys sat on the field, staring directly at the sun. Zhang remarked that whoever looked away from the sun first would lose the game, and Lin Fan agreed. After a while, Zhang, trying to trick Lin Fan, told him to look away because he couldn't endure the pain any longer. Falling for it, Lin Fan looked away, allowing Zhang to win the game, which he celebrated with glee. Meanwhile, Hao and One-Eyed sat observing the two boys play. One-Eyed began to wonder how Lin Fan could stare at the sun for so long without suffering retinal damage. He speculated that Lin Fan might have been born with a particularly strong constitution. Curious, he asked Hao if it had been proven that Lin Fan had such a constitution, and if so, whether he could take him along. Hao, taken aback by the proposal, could hardly believe what he was hearing. Hao immediately told One-Eye that he could take Lin Fan and even throw in his friend as a bonus, on the condition that he never return them and sign a formal contract stating that the hospital would not be held accountable if anything happened to them. One-Eyed assured Hao there was no need to worry, and with that, the deal was sealed. One-Eyed then informed Hao that the city was under attack by monsters that had grown more clever, and he would need the boys since they were clearly gifted. After saying this, he stood up and approached the boys, who were still playing, and asked if they were the ones who ate the level 2 monster. The boys quickly thought on their feet and flat out denied it. Frustrated, One-Eyed sent his fiery fist straight toward Lin Fan's face, but to his surprise, Lin Fan didn't even flinch. Assuming Lin Fan lacked good reflexes, One-Eyed concluded that even after training, Lin Fan would likely be no more than a mere third-rank warrior. However, seeing the attack on Lin Fan, Zhang leaned in and whispered to him, saying that One-Eyed wanted to help him cultivate his strength. This idea excited both boys. They then told One-Eyed that deep down, he was a good man despite his rugged face. However, they remarked that his ugly face might be an obstacle to proper cultivation. With that, Zhang stood up and suggested he cured One-Eyed's vision so that his face would look better, making it easier to cultivate Lin Fan. Lin Fan chimed in, boasting that Zhang was a master of acupuncture and could fix his eye defect. After much persistence from the boys, One-Eyed touched his damaged eye and figured it couldn't get any worse, so he agreed to give it a try. He sat down on the field and instructed Zhang to go ahead and stab wherever he needed to. Without hesitation, Zhang pierced several points around One-Eyed's head while he stood still. After a while, Zhang stabbed his forehead, and One-Eyed calmly asked if this acupuncture method actually had a name or if Zhang was just stabbing randomly. Zhang confidently replied that it was called the half-step running method, the best in the world. He claimed to have been developing it for years, and even mentioned that he was the inventor of the technique. He added that everyone he had stabbed said it was the best method they had ever experienced. Despite Zhang's claims, One-Eyed could feel no improvement and smiled, thinking he was just wasting time with these crazy men. But then, Zhang stabbed the lower part of his forehead, sending a sudden surge of vibrations throughout One-Eyed's body. He felt the vibrations deep in his mind, and at that moment, his spirit left him. He lost consciousness, but Lin Fan caught him just before his head could hit the ground. Seeing this, Zhang was confused and wondered why his acupuncture method didn't work as intended. He then asked Lin Fan if he could try it on him, assuring him that he would do better this time. Lin Fan agreed, but within seconds, he too was flat on the ground, unconscious. Zhang, still perplexed, decided to try the method on himself and passed out almost immediately. A little later, Director Hao arrived at the scene and was shocked to see all three of them lying on the ground unconscious. He was even more stunned to realize that a top city guardian like One-Eyed had also been knocked out by the maniacs. Hao immediately called the city hospital's emergency line, where the nurses were already in disbelief that they were receiving another call from the dreaded psychiatric ward. Before Hao could explain, they already knew something was up, and they assured him they would send an ambulance right away. With that, Hao quickly told them to send 2 ambulances this time since 3 people were involved. Soon, 2 ambulances arrived and loaded Zhang, Lin Fan, and One-Eyed. But the driver of the ambulance had his eyes completely bandaged, which made the psychiatric hospital staff wonder how he could possibly drive. The driver assured them he was an expert and had driven this route more times than a normal person would. With that, he slammed the door shut and sped off like a madman, leaving Hao and the orderly standing in dismay, watching him drive away. Will our crazy protagonist and his buds survive to save the city from the terror of the monsters? Comment Mad Men if you're eager to find out in our part 2. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content like this. As always, thanks for watching.